the gravesite of Deacon David Wilder. We're in Pine Grove Cemetery, and we're noting that Deacon David Wilder died on September 21st, 1866.
Okay, our next event has to do with Deacon David Wilder, who wrote A History of Leominster. Happens that on September 21st, 1866, Mr. Wilder died. He held many positions of trust in Leominster. We have a little bit of his obituary here that we can read aloud. Deacon David Wilder, the historian and registered physician. Deacon David Wilder, born May 3rd, 1778, died September 1st, 1866, at the age of 88. He married Sally Norris Butler, who died in 1833, and thereafter, Mr. Wilder lived a lonely life. His obituary, which was published in the Fitchburg Reveille, gives a fine picture of the man. No citizen of Leominster ever held more offices of trust given by the people than the honorable gentleman who has left us, and no office ever honored him so much as he honored the office. He represented the town for 11 years in the Massachusetts legislature. He was a justice of the quorum through the Commonwealth, a state senator, commissioner of highways, member of the governor's council, and for 5 years, the constitutional term of office, treasurer of the Commonwealth. He was a very busy man, and he wrote the history of Leominster. Mark, what do you know about David that we haven't got here from our obituary?
Well, interestingly, when he started his history of Leominster, it really was an outgrowth of something he was asked to do in November of 1851. So 1850, 1851 was a busy time in Leominster. There was a lot of things that were happening. Gardner Hall was converted into a high school because in 1850, public high schools were required in the Commonwealth and they had a certain population. Of course, the new town halls that was deemed was built in 1851. The number 6 schoolhouse was built in 1851. There was a steeple in the Orthodox Congregational Church that got struck by lightning at that time and was reconstructed in 1850 and 1851. There were a lot of things going on. But of course, the sort of centerpiece of all this was the new town hall. So when you build a new public building, of course you dedicate it, and invited to speak was, I'm sure because of his historical knowledge and background, was David Wilder, Deacon David Wilder. So he gave an oration at the dedication of the new town hall in November of 1851. If you're old enough, like me, you can still remember that building. I think it was raised sometime in the late 60s. For many years, it was the police station until the new police station was opened in 1959. They were the only public bathrooms downtown back in the day. So when people were shopping on foot downtown, they would use it for that purpose. Years before that, it was a location of a library, many years before that. The bell is on the common. That was a gift of Joel Crosby. It's still on the common today on the War Memorial. So it was quite a deal when this building was dedicated. He gave this oration. And back then, if you did a good job and your oration was well received, it was an honor typically to have it printed. So they printed it for him and they put it in a nice little blue booklet and they distributed them. And many people, as a result of that oration, which was a review of Leominster's history from its beginning, with the original grant of land in 1701 to his charter in 1740, to of course up to date, 1851. That review, because of that review, he was encouraged to write an actual history of Leominster.
It seems early for a history.
Well, don't forget now, the white settlers were in Lancaster in 1643. Okay. So, by that point, we were around for a couple hundred years in one form or another as Lancaster or Leominster. So, we think of that as a long time ago, we think of that as young history, but it wasn't. Reverend Stebbins did a centennial discourse in 1843 of the first 100 years of the church. So that was a big deal too. But so anyway, Wilder starts his history on December 3rd, 1851. And he writes a little preface in his book saying, boy, why me? This awesome task. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it. He's really, sort of concerned. And a year to the day later, on December 3rd, 1852, he writes, I've lived long enough to finish it. You can tell he's almost exasperated. It was quite a task, but it's done. And then it gets published the following year in 1853. No one since has really written a history of Leominster. We've had a variety of books. We've had Emerson's books, the pictorial books. We've had Emerson's Historical and Picturesque, which has text. I call it compartmentalized text, where it lists different things like the post offices and the postmasters and the lawyers and the doctors and the banks and the stores, but it's not a narrative history.
Right.
Same thing with combing through Leominster history. Great book, lots of wonderful photographs, nicely put together, but not a textual narrative history of Leominster.
Right.
So, and even Wilder's book, which comes the closest, isn't really a narrative history. It's again compartmentalized. It's got sections on church, it's got sections on patriotism, it's got sections on different types of businesses, from piano shops to tanneries to comb manufacturers. But it's a great resource.
It is.
Yeah, it really is. So back in November, I was in Barnes & Noble and I was thinking about my next book project, which was my ninth book, and I decided, hey, I really don't have anything in particular. I have a couple things that aren't quite ready. Why not write a history of Leominster this winter? So, like Wilder, I set out to do it in late November, November 30th.
Did you have the same perturbations at the beginning?
I truly did. I truly did. And I got to tell you something. It knocked the crap out of me. I wrote 144,000 words in 4 months. And I just felt sort of obsessed with it, that I wanted to get it finished. And I felt the same sort of relief when it was done in late April. But it was quite a journey. And I actually discovered something in my research that Wilder got very wrong.
Wow.
Wilder in his book talks about our first minister, John Rogers, being a direct descendant of his namesake, John Rogers, who was the first martyr under Mary Queen of Scots, which is a huge piece of history.
Yeah.
But it turns out it isn't true. Turns out that Wilder based it on a letter that was found at the Unitarian Church, allegedly written by Minister Rogers back in his ministry. But that letter wasn't written by Minister Rogers. It was written by Rufus Stebbins, who was the minister that gave the Centennial Discourse. And he put John Rogers' name to it. He made it up. And he connected the genealogy was made up.
Wow.
And another reverend named George.
It had to be so.
He didn't know, but George Bodge debunked it. And it turns out there isn't any lineal connection between the martyr John Rogers and our first minister, which to me was kind of cool because I got to be able to talk about both topics.
Exactly.
Who John Rogers the martyr was, and this supposed connection that for many years David Wilder promoted through his history, and then the debunking of it, which is equally an interesting story.
And
so
you talk about that in your upcoming book?
Yeah, so I feel like I feel a bit connected to David Wilder, and I've always been fascinated by the fact that he took this on, and he really did leave us with a lot of valuable information that aids historians today, myself included. And I like to think what I wrote someday, a century hence, or 2 centuries hence, will do the same thing. We all, us writers, I think all write for legacy.
Yeah.
Or video producers. There's a certain legacy quality to what you do. And I felt like it was the only thing I could write that somebody might actually read in 200 years. But I look at it as this, it's a dynamic process, and it's one person's view at a point in time, and hopefully in the future somebody else will take it up and increase it, expand it, and make it better, and continue the process.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to read that book. That
Thanks.
sounds great. Thank you for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The next story on our event calendar comes up on September 21st. This was in 1975. We read here that the Lake Whalum Playhouse burned down that day. Mike Kerrigan is here to tell us a little bit more about the Lake Whalum Playhouse and the manager, Guy Palmerton. Mike, what can you tell us about the Lake Whalum Playhouse?
Okay, thank you again. I remember the night the playhouse burned down. I lived in Whalum. Unfortunately, the playhouse had been used. The playhouse actually shut down in 1968, I believe. Guy Palmerton Productions, due to a financial crisis, they shut it down. So from 68 all the way to 75, for 7 years, it was used as a storage bin, storage space by the Whalum Park Amusement Company. This theater, it was a tragedy. It was the second oldest outdoor theater in the United summer theater, you could call it, in the United States. It was the second oldest. The Whalum Park Amusement Company was started in 1893. It was purchased by the F&L Street Railway Company, and they had the intelligence or the foresight to send trolley tracks all the way right into the park. So people back in those days, obviously the automobile was, I don't even think there were automobiles back then, no there were not. So by 1898 the theater was in full swing, and people from Fitchburg and Leominster were taking the trolley right up into the park, and families could be at the camping grounds or the picnic groves, for the entire Sunday or weekend events. And then at night they had the Whalum Park Theater, and this went on for like 70 years. And the theater was, another gentleman was Arthur Ashley. As the Whalum Theater grew famous, another famous publication of the Whalum Theater was the Whalum Breeze, and it advertised constantly about who was going to be playing at the theater that particular night or during the week. And Arthur Ashley was one of the Broadway productions that came over and played at the theater. But this went on for many years, and unfortunately with many things that have happened in Leominster, everything correlates with the nation's history. And we had, by 1930, the Depression, and the Whalum Playhouse was slowly going bankrupt, and they were questioning as to whether or not the Playhouse was going to survive. And the big event was 1934 for the Playhouse, and this is a gentleman that saved the Playhouse. His name was Guy Palmerton, and he ran the Playhouse from 1934 to 1968.
Wow, a long time.
Yes, and he looked at he was a Broadway producer, and he saw, back in those days they still had the silver screen and what have you. But he saw that the first thing he did was he took the name of theater and replaced it with Playhouse, because he refused to be identified with the silver screen. So he felt that the Lake Whalum Playhouse was the best title to put on the building.
Being live entertainment versus a movie.
Yes. And that was, he had, during his tenure, so many different Broadway and Hollywood actors and actresses in there. It's amazing. I grew up not even 500 feet from the Playhouse, and we've had people like Jane Mansfield, Mickey Rooney, Dana Andrews. I mean, this is Tallulah Bankhead. Tallulah Bankhead actually set the record for the attendance for a live performance. 5,000 people showed for the performance of Dear Charles. So you can see that this was big business, and this was helping the country get out of the Leominster area, get out of the Depression. Leominster at that point probably had like 30,000 people, and to have one showing, 5,000 people. Obviously, people from Fitchburg and Gardner were using the trolley or however they were getting to the theater, to the Playhouse. This is what they were attracted to Guy Palmerton. So this here, we even had 1920 John Philip Sousa visited Whalum. He's considered the March King of by Americans and people throughout the world. And they in the 20s they even had the Richard Morgan plays performed, and as I mentioned previously, Arthur Ashley performed right around the Depression. But as mentioned, Guy Palmerton helped get the Playhouse, helped it survive the Depression that they were in, and this is all in 1934. And in 1938 we had the Great Hurricane of '38, and it was rumored that Guy Palmerton actually took money out of his own wallet to rebuild the Playhouse. So this guy was a real champion for entertainment, and he actually even had a daily show on WEIM back in the 50s, a 15-minute talk show called Broadway Comes to Whalum, and with Guy's connections to the Broadway industry, he had a lot of just Gypsy Rose Lee, Mickey Rooney, as I mentioned, Merv Griffin, Emma Jean Coca, Jane Mansfield, Gloria Swanson, Arthur Treacher, John Payne, Vincent Price, Joan Caulfield, Joan Fontaine, Veronica Lake, Dorothy Lamour, Mae West. I mean, this was an impressive list of entertainers that came to Whalum back in the 50s and 60s. And as a kid back in the mid-60s, I was walking over to the Lady of the Lake Church, and I would look over and I would see they had a little red shed over right on the Leominster-Lunenburg line. It was actually in Leominster, I believe. And you could actually see who was coming from Hollywood or from Broadway for that following week. They were already painting the name of the star in black and white on these white planks, and they would put them up and say, all right, this is who's going to be in Whalum for that weekend. It was just amazing, and I remember my parents bringing me up on Route 13, we're driving over to church or whatever it was we were going in North Leominster that night. I looked over and this beautiful blonde-haired lady was standing there in the porch, and it was Jane Mansfield.
Wow.
And my mom one night was gathering pizza for us over at the old Cabote's restaurant in Whalum, and she looked over and lo and behold, there's Cesar Romero.
My goodness.
Can I have your autograph, sir? This is Whalum on a typical Friday night. We had so much entertainment, but it was Guy Palmerton. He was the mastermind behind it. He had the connections. Unfortunately, after all those years and decades of being in Whalum, times caught up to Guy Palmerton, and color TV had a lot to do with it. People were buying color TVs back in 1966 and 67, and they said, well, why pay all this money for a Broadway show right here next door? We've got the color TV, and we'll go that route. So that was pretty much like how the VCRs replaced the drive-in theaters and what have you.
Yeah.
But it was also cost-wise, wasn't efficient. These Hollywood stars now were like baseball free agents. They were commanding more and more money, even for a weekend gig at the Playhouse. And they were demanding so much money that Guy just simply couldn't have the financing. And eventually the theater shut down in late August of '68. The Playhouse shut down in that August of '68. But as you can see, there were so many different, and Eve Arden even, she was a favorite of mine. Eve Arden played there too, and Joan Blondell, I don't know if I mentioned her
I see
name.
Veronica Lake and Dorothy
Yeah, it's
Lamour
amazing.
on the list. It
Yeah.
must have made quite an impact for Leominster to be able to have these famous nationwide stars
Yes, yeah.
coming here.
But as I mentioned, there was even, Guy was even so determined to have a success of the Playhouse. It was a couple of times where production was questionable. In other words, people weren't going to come to it, and he got on WEIM. Oh, so-and-so's coming here, and he was handing out free tickets, making sure that, and of course he was going to reimburse the show, but that's how dedicated showman he was. And, you know, God bless him. And as I mentioned, the Playhouse was a storage facility for Whalen Park for 7 years, and a fire unfortunately took it down in 75. So
A great loss.
there was, and I keep on trying to emphasize what that Playhouse meant to the Montezuma region and to Leominster, because now there are apartment buildings in there, you know, and they're modern and all that, but those people living there have no conception about how much Hollywood and Broadway was performing right there at their apartment building now. You know, it's amazing, you know. And Guy Palmerton, I believe, died the same year, and it was like a 1-2 punch to the entertainment industry.
So we can
In Leominster.
Guy, we can classify him as putting Leominster on the map, really, in this area on the map, or bringing all these celebrities into this area.
I would call this gentleman, Guy Palmerton, 1934 to 1968, the Ed Sullivan of Leominster. That's what he was. And he got all this entertainment over to the Playhouse, and people flocked to his Playhouse for many summers. And as a kid growing up in Whalen, I remember the cars being backed up on Whalen Road all the way down past the Shore Ball Field, and you know, people were trying to get into the Playhouse.
Wow.
You know, and Guy was one that put on the show, and it was great having him as an entertainer. But yes, I would correctly have to call him, he was our Ed Sullivan.
There you go.
Thank you, Mike. Really interesting. September 24th, 1712, John Rogers is born. John Rogers, at the age of 31, became the first minister of Leominster. He would eventually be dismissed from his duties by Leominster. And we went on location to the Pine Grove Cemetery to talk about Reverend John Rogers and his story.
Yeah, yes, we did. And once again, like I said, on the third day, we went down there and we found his marker. It took us a little while to find it, but once you're there and you find the markers, you kind of get a general idea where they are and everything. And we had filmed that, and that's all coming in on the timeline. Mary?
It's August 10th, 2019. The dynamic historians are here at Pine Grove Cemetery. Here we are looking at the stone for Reverend John Rogers. Who is Reverend John Rogers? Well, he was the first minister of Leominster. He started as a minister in Leominster in 1743. So he was the first minister, and he preached in the first meeting house. Everything was going along swimmingly until in 1757 he had a little spat with his congregation, and they had a disagreement about church philosophy, and he was dismissed from his position. He sued through the court of Worcester, and Leominster set up a new precinct in North Leominster, and John Rogers built a parsonage, and he was allowed to preach there until he passed away in 1789. This is his stone. As it says, he was in the ministry from September 25th, 1713 to November 16th, 1787.
September 24th, 1924, dedication of the Jewish synagogue located on Pleasant Street. Mary, did you want to talk about that event that we had that I just talked about.
That was a really interesting story to read about the synagogue and the group of people of the Agudat Achim congregation, Jewish congregation, and to actually go to Pleasant Street and see where the synagogue used to meet.
Yeah, and today it's used as a medical building today. We went over there one Sunday and we actually found that building that Mary was talking about, and I was talking about at that event. And then we went over there to the current synagogue place that was over there on Washington Street.
That's right.
And that's all coming in on a timeline. And also on a timeline, I had found a photograph of, Mary had found the photograph of the stone dedication when they dedicated the synagogue on Pleasant Street.
Right.
And if you look real closely, I'll point them out to you in the photograph. Henry Sawtell was in the photograph, and that was the first mayor of Leominster, Mary.
That's fascinating.
You know, so I thought that was a really great photograph when you found me that photograph. Thank you.
It is. You're welcome. Moving on to September 26th, 1774. Someone we're all familiar with, John Chapman, who's also known as Johnny Appleseed, was born in Leominster on this day. We went to the Johnny Appleseed Memorial on Johnny Appleseed Lane, didn't we, Ron?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. And for those of you who might not know where Johnny Appleseed Lane is, it's going up towards Targets in Mechanic Street area. You like the old dump site. You go down the hill. There's a Johnny Road Park, Memorial Park over there, and it's right before Rice Hill. And if you take your right and you go down the street about maybe 100 yards or so, not even, but if you blink your eye, you go right by it. And so we were over there. We filmed it, and that's all coming in on the timeline. Mary.
No, John.
September 26, 1774. John Chapman, or Johnny Appleseed, is born in Leominster.
We're on Johnny Appleseed Lane at the marker that shows where John Chapman was born. This is Mary Murata from the Leominster Historical Society. I'm here with Ron Gerard from the Leominster Historical Commission, and we're observing the birthplace of Johnny Appleseed.
That's correct, Mary. And I'm going to roll the camera left to right and show people what's here. There's a lot of brush that needs to get cleaned up, but we're here. There's a little house that the Boy Scouts built here for a replica house. I'm going to move the camera to the left, and then I'm going to go in front of the little house and show people what it looks like from that point of view.
September 29th, 1927. The Music Hall in Leominster was destroyed by fire on this day. Ron, I didn't know that we ever had a music hall before we started doing the research for this show.
Well, that's correct, Mary. The music hall was located on Mechanic Street, coming down from West Street and going into on Mechanic Street. It was located on the right-hand side. For those of you, if you know where Tim's Diner is, it was right across the street from Tim's Diner, from where Bank of America is. And it burned in 1920. 7, and it wasn't just a music hall. It was vaudeville shows, burlesque shows, and stuff like that. Now, coming in on a timeline, we have a number of fire photographs that we have and some before and after images. And Mary, through her research at the Leominster Historical Society, this is a first, found the photograph of what the inside of the music hall looked like back then in the main lobby entrance. So that's all coming in on a
like
timeline.
it was beautiful inside.
Yeah. And a girl, Karen Byrne, and I, we did a documentary, actually 2 documentaries here at the studio about the complete history of the movie theaters in Leominster, and that came up on that timeline as well.
Wow.
And through her research and our research at the Leominster Library and research in the microfilm, she was reading about how really beautiful it looked in the inside, and she thought maybe it was just a made-up story with the newspapers. But when you show me that photograph, it verifies what the paper was saying, Mary.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'd put that out there, and I guess that's about all I want to say.
We went out and filmed on location.
We did.
To see where the music hall was and do a kind of a comparison before and after.
That's correct. Thank you for that, Mary.
September 29th, 1927, the music hall located on 23 Mechanic Street in Leominster was destroyed by a fire. Today, we are standing on the corner of opposite of where the music hall was on Mechanic Street.
Hi, my name is Juan Gerard. Today we're filming inside the Leominster Historical Society with Mark Bonanza. This month's event brings us to Mr. Lou Little, September 29th, 1947. Leominster football player and collegiate coach Lou Little is featured on the front cover of Newsweek magazine and was called a football genius. Mark, you want to explain that and tell us a little bit of history about Mr. Lou Little?
Wow, what a huge topic. Our Leominster native, Luigi Piccolo, that was his Italian name,
Right.
anglicized to Lou Little, is something we can all be very proud of. Lou was quite a gentleman, not only a great football coach, but a good guy. And he helped many Leominster kids get scholarships at Columbia where he coached football.
Right.
And perhaps one of the 2 largest Lou Little stories, there are several, involve 1, the Rose Bowl in 1934, and 2, the Heisman Trophy.
Right.
So in 1934, January 1934, the Stanford football team won the Pac-10 championship. And back in those days, believe it or not, the Rose Bowl was the only college football bowl game. Today, I'm going to guess we have more than 50 of them.
Yeah.
Now, the Rose Bowl started in 1902. January 1, 1934 was the last time the Rose Bowl was the only bowl game. So, back in those days, the winner of Pac-10 got to choose their opponent. So, Stanford in 1934, actually end of 1933, chose the unofficial national champion, which was Michigan. Michigan didn't want to ruin that, turned them down. Next they chose the Princeton Tigers, who were undefeated. They didn't want to ruin their undefeated record, they turned them down. The last choice was Columbia, who had a great season. And part of the reason for the choice was Columbia was a darling of the New York media, which meant a lot of attention. Columbia administrators didn't want to play in the game because they didn't think there was any chance that Columbia Lions could beat Stanford. And many football odds makers thought they'd lose by 6 touchdowns.
Wow.
And they didn't want Columbia to be seen as participating in big-time college football.
Right.
because that wasn't what they were. They were a bastion of academia. But Coach Little and others were revealed upon the administrators, and they said, hey, the boys got the invitation, let them have it. They took the train across the country, they went out to Pasadena. They played a thrilling game on a play called the KF-79, which was a naked fullback bootleg play.
Okay.
Columbia scored the only touchdown of the game, won the game 7-0. One of the greatest upsets in college football history. At that time, pro football didn't mean a lot. College football meant everything. So that game was like the Super Bowl. No TV, of course, in 1933 or 34. On January 34, after that game, Lou Little goes to the microphone to a national television audience. I'm sorry, national radio audience, and says, first words, hello to all my friends back in Leominster. So this is like Bill Belichick winning the Super Bowl, and if he was from Leominster, saying hello to my friends there. They say at the time that you could hear a cheer through the center of Leominster, to everybody listening to their radio, even though their windows were closed because it was January. You could hear this throng. A few weeks later, he, after being feted in New York by Mayor LaGuardia for this major accomplishment, he was taken to Union Station by train, and they had a parade all the way from Worcester to Leominster. They closed all the factories, all the schools, everybody lined the streets, the factory whistles were going off, church bells were going off. They had a huge banquet for him in City Hall. It was a big deal.
So this guy was, so what you're telling me, what I know a little bit about Mr. Little, this guy was a hero in my eyes.
Huge,
Yeah.
especially in Leominster. So, and then the following year, the Downtown Athletic Club, you may recognize that
Yes.
name. Okay, so they're the ones who give out the Heisman every year,
Okay.
right? Biggest award in college football. So the first year it comes out, they asked Lou Little, John Heisman, and a guy named Jim Crowley, who was came to fame as one of the Notre Dame Four Horsemen. Those three guys sit down and they helped design and approve a trophy for the Downtown Athletic Club, which was to be given to the best college football player east of the Mississippi. A year later, Heisman died. He was the coach at Georgia, another legendary coach. They renamed the trophy the Heisman, and they gave it to the best college football player for the entire country. So Lou Little, our Leominster Lou Little, had a hand in designing and approving the Heisman Trophy.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
And it goes on from there.
Okay.
He played his high school football here in 1910. His team was the first undefeated team for Leominster High School. He coached at Georgetown first, and he had a great career there. There's a tremendous motivational story about his coaching days at Georgetown. Then went to Columbia, and our own director, one of our own directors, Rick Como, played at Columbia for Lou Little and helped, got a scholarship through the help of John Joyce, administrator here in Leominster. And Lou Little wanted kids from Leominster to get a Columbia education and play football there if there was an opening for them, and many kids from Leominster were helped by Lou Little.
Oh, wow. So, based on what you told me and what you're telling the audience out here, I mean, at some point I'm thinking that maybe it would be great to get Mr. Como down to the studio, you down to the studio, and Mary and I down to the studio, and we'll all sit down and talk about all this.
Great topic, though. Another one of his famous football players was Jack Kerouac,
Yeah.
the author. And he also coached Robert Kraft.
Oh, really?
Robert Kraft went to
Okay.
Columbia and played football.
Wow.
Under Lou Little. Lou Little was quite a gentleman. Was a very great dresser, known for his dapper looks. Did a lot of advertisements. Unfortunately, most of them were cigarettes, because back in those days, they didn't understand the dangers of them. When television was in its infancy, he was on the Jack Parr show. He was quite a guy.
Yeah.
And I gotta say this too. He believed in the whole athlete. Like, in other words, he wanted his kids, his football players, to get an education. And it wasn't just about football. And he was recognized as being the coach of the whole player. And Time Magazine gave him an award for that. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. he's just an all-around great guy, and should be very proud that he's a Leominster native.
Right. And again, I'd like to thank Mark for coming in today and taking some time out
Yeah, my
from his
pleasure.
busy schedule and helping us out with these great historical events. And Mark, you got a number of different books out here that you had written there. I'm going to put them up on a timeline and put a tag information in where people can purchase
Sure.
these wonderful books. And if you haven't had a chance to look at any of them, I highly recommend them. One of my favorite books is over here is the Leominster Chronicles. Mark tells a lot of great history about our city and the events in this book, and many of our stories come from Mark's writings. And we really want to thank Mark for
The Roosevelt story in greater detail is in Leominster Chronicles. One of the 42
Yeah,
stories.
I remember looking at some of that
Yeah.
this morning there to give you some idea of what I can have talked to you about it
Sure.
tomorrow. I'd like to thank you again for stopping in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
What was that, good?
Yeah.
And Mary, are you ready for this?
Oh, I don't know.
This brings us to the last calendar date of the month, September 30th, 1925. During the enforcement of the prohibition, drunkenness remains the biggest problem in the Leominster Police Department. Almost half of the arrests made at the end of the summer were attributed to alcohol consumption. Mary, that must have been one heck of a summer.
It must have been. Prohibition didn't really help a lot with drunkenness, I guess.
No, and if you followed along with our calendar earlier, we referenced this event a couple of times over the course of that length of time. At one particular month, the Leominster police there got together and they were dumping all the alcohol down the sewage drain and everything, and so I guess when they finally were able to drink all that legally, I guess that's when the party began for that summer.
I guess so.
And so this concludes the month of September, Mary.
Yep.
I want to remind people to be watching for the month of October. Are you ready for this, Mary?
I don't know, are we?
We got another first. The first road in Leominster comes up on the first calendar day of the month of October. Can you guess what that is? Be watching, because Mary and I are going to be going out on location on the first road in Leominster, and it's still there. It hasn't gone away.
And we'll see you out there while we're on location.
Okay, and once again, before we close out, I'd like to thank Mark Pedanza again for helping us out with some local events, and Mike Kerrigan as well, and thank the guys at Leominster Access Television for letting us use the studio and their equipment for putting this all together for us.
We appreciate it
Thank
so
you guys.
much.
Have a good month. Bye.